are in the scene multiple nights out of the week, how do you sort of see attendances? Have they, you always hear they're down.
It's
Is that how you
so
find
hard
it?
to pick at the moment. I have a lot of conversations with a lot of venue owners, right? So I have a long history with the Wickham Park Hotel from playing there with Di Pritchard, and also, helping them with their PA for years. And, I've said Lazard's, there's entrance leagues. I used to do a bunch of stuff for Wes at one time. And then there's a couple production companies that take me out, and I end up going to some venues and doing, like Black Stars a couple weekends ago at the 16 Footers, which is a groovy venue. So, but it's really weird. I think at the moment, once you think as a venue owner or someone that works in this business and you work in a building, you think you've got something figured out, you're reminded that you can't call it.
Yeah.
Because I have seen what should be like guaranteed usual kickers. Pseudo flop.
Yeah.
But then the next time they come around, it's all back on. Right? And you're like, what the hell happened last time? Right? But we've had such disruption to our city. And this is a particular bugbear of mine, and you know it.
Because you live right in,
Yeah.
right
I
in the
live
heart
right
of.
on Watt Street, dude, and I had...
Let loose.
You had supercars, rail construction, everything.
The track is 3 meters from my bedroom window.
Yeah.
So...
And for a sound man to complain about the noise, it clearly has to.
Well, I'll tell you what. I haven't lived in a city in a while, right? And I did live in New York City for a little while. But I've usually been a little bit more out in the burbs, or like when I was in San Antonio, the Mexican section was actually the southern section. I ended up down there. I have this funny habit of sometimes gravitating towards minority communities. I don't know why. Maybe it's the music culture. So this town, which has such a rich history, which was like downtown was ignored for a long time. But I do remember when I first started coming up here, like 15 years ago or something like that. There was that whole kind
That's
of
the time frame of you being in Newcastle is around 15 years.
Well, I've lived here 5 or 6 now.
Yeah.
Timeline for me is always a little bit. I always have to go and reconstruct to get dates a little bit. I'm kind of like that. It was when Newcastle was like a bit of like rabbit warrens where they were still working on reconstruction post earthquake.
Yep.
And like they were like these funny little pop-up galleries and stuff in the rabbit warren. So it was kind of like it was this desolate place, but like you'd walk through in it and you could tell that at that time council was finding some way to use some space, making it cheap, going, you'll probably lose this, but here's the thing, here's $10 a week, have your art and have the front part of the building while we fix everything else. Right? So like I walked into that and it was still all very steel town down at the foreshore. And so I first landed here and it was just like, wow, man, this would be like if Philadelphia was on the water. Right? Totally reminded me of just like any steel town I've ever been in. Saw some in Germany. Just they have that similar kind of vibe, right? Yeah. And so I understood the music of Silverchair, and I understood the music of the Screaming Jets, and it working class, Rocktown, and the underground art culture, right? And so because I came in when Newcastle was really gutted. And from the history, from what I've learned, is when the earthquake happened, because downtown really kind of got walloped, Islington and whatnot, and like the Kent Hotel, and all of a sudden became central Newcastle. So hence why we have the Wicco, and we have the Kent, and we have all those pubs around there that... On Sunday, there's the great Newcastle pub crawl. It starts at the Prem early in the afternoon, and then you wander over to the Wicco for the late afternoon. And if you still want to rock on, you go to the Kent, where I had a residency with Di and Dave for a year and a half or something like that.
Yeah.
And you go and sweat it out there, and you'd play the first set to almost nobody, but then the Wicca would close, and then all of a sudden, all the people that when you went and played the Prem a month later, you'd be like, "Oh, I remember your face at the Wicca. Wow, you've been going since when?" And it would rock on, you know. I think they've made a rather large deal sometimes about some of the incidents that have happened at a place like the Kent. And I find it unfortunate, some of the things that have been happening there with like the Oasis and stuff like that, limitation of hours and things like that. But, you know, the supercars thing, I'm going to keep that short. Council gave up all oversight on the work being done, and it was done by cowboys.
I've heard a lot of stories.
I am very, very suspect that all of us that live along that road were exposed to asbestos, because I watched them smash 50 to 100-year-old sewer pipes that, as far as I know, during that period, the only thing that they ever lashed them together with was asbestos strapping, right? So, and there was no containment. I saw a whole bunch of stuff. Their concrete work is atrocious. And my brother is a super for one of the biggest builders in the United States. I've seen how you do it, and I've watched them do it. Tain't how you do it. And I've watched businesses get walloped, some of them that I worked for, and there's not been any of the compensation equal to what should have been done. And it seems like they decided to throw everything at once, right? And, you know, we didn't need to have a light rail. The corridor was fine and already there. I think the time's going to come that when Newcastle really gets on its feet again, they're going to find the light rail's not going to be able to keep up with demand and be like going, wow, imagine if we had a heavy rail line. So I think short-sightedness and haste has made this a really, really hard time. I've watched businesses downtown shut. I've seen some of them really struggle. I've seen one in particular that is known for their charity work that actually had to cut back on how much of their income they were giving away to the charities that they have been doing for, I have no idea, because they were here before I came here. And so that's where like this whole thing where this hashtag idea that I think the Wicco came up with T-shirts of that just said, we were here first, right? There's all this development and everything that's shutting down the culture here. And, you know, we're starting to get noise police. You know, my favorite town, one of my favorite towns, Austin, like I said, they're facing the same thing. And they have a campaign that they call Keep Austin Weird. How do we keep Austin weird, right? And there's something really, really crucial about that. Because if you like the things that are cultural about your city, you have to make sure that you support those cultures, because once they go, it becomes dead.
How much support do you find that there's been a cultural shift away from evaluation of music as a form of entertainment? There seems to be a complete surplus of things you can do other than that. You can start home,
look,
Netflix
we're up against it with the whole Netflix thing and stuff, where it's so easy to blah, blah, blah. But I always think that there's a backlash against these things. Right? Where suddenly it's just like, you know, my sciatic is getting me because I've been sitting on the lounge all day, feasting on another series again, right? You know, and this is the second run because I fell asleep on it the first time, right? So as much as I think that there are some really big forces that are making it feel like we're under siege, I do think that thanks to guys like Grant Walmsley from the Screamin' Jets, and Marcus Wright, and there's quite a list, that have been kind of getting together with council and starting to say, hey, you know,
these protections in place for
and
venues and
you know. What happens when a 160-year-old pub suddenly has high-dollar apartments built right on top of them? You know, is that trade-off worth it? You know, how many jobs and stuff does and you know, that's your history. That's, you know, and it's a little bit of, there will be a time 20 years after the fact that if you lose all this, no one's going to want to live here.
Yeah. How do you get people? Why don't people go out anymore?
Well, you know, I think they do. I think there's some places that have corporatized too much where, like, you know, some of the big clubs, the entertainment is booked by someone who looks at it as just a checklist thing that you check off. So they've checked an act. Mm-hmm. And, you know, like, I have nothing against cover acts and stuff. You know, I think, you know, there's some great cover acts there. And look, clubs are a lot, but there's other things out there. And always picking the easiest thing, it gets stale even for the people that are there, you know, in the Pokies and all the but then they have the, you know, the big shows where they put other stuff on, and it's just, like I said, it's been really, really, really hard for, I think, businesses to make the call. Like, we have all these transportation issues now, right? And these are serious issues. You know, when I was still at the ballroom, there were still all those like through the night buses, right? And so a whole bunch of patrons that when 2, 3 a.m. would come around, if they weren't wanting to do the full night, they could go, I'm off, and they could safely go home at a reasonable rate. And, you know, and there you're dealing with an alternative crowd. They could time it in a way where they had security there and they wouldn't feel threatened because, man, there were some issues with that. So you're talking about the lockout laws before. Should have been a temporary situation because there were some things going on. Because, man, I remember I had a van that wouldn't start after a gig at the Wicco once. So I actually slept in my van at the Wicco on a Sunday night. Got up on the Monday, sorted the thing out, and started driving home. And it was like really early, and suddenly it was all stopped at the railroad crossing, man. And there were cops running everywhere. The train was being held on and off, on and off. Some dude goes flying off, and supposedly they've been after this guy since like 3 o'clock in the morning. When lockout came, and he had like glassed somebody, right? And so there was a panic. And in hindsight, I wouldn't have done it this way, but they went and did. But see, now it's choking everybody. Because I can tell you, working in a venue, after lockout got really, really interesting. So you've gone to the place, show starts 7:30. So you had dinner beforehand, start having a few drinks, show's over at 11:30. You might want to stick around and still have a bit of a boogie. Well, somewhere in the next hour or something, I like to go and get myself something to eat. Absorb some of this alcohol.
Go and get a kebab down
and then come back. Well, now you have people who don't get that option, and maybe half their friends insist on staying, and they have one too many, and maybe the peanuts and the stuff that are there aren't enough to deal with it. Or you have someone who stops drinking who's had a bunch and then suddenly goes into the crash, and they're a bit of a mess. Or what's even worse, the worst things that used to always happen is someone would come to the door and go out when the security guard wasn't there to check them. And because they got out the door when someone wasn't looking and they didn't realize it was lockout, suddenly they're not allowed in. Their purse, it happened to women all the time, purse is still inside, their friends are in, but the club can get shut down if we're seen showing human leniency to a human being who is a patron of your pub, who is not the problem, right? And so I think it was such an overcorrection that on so many unintended levels, it has had a huge impact, and it's really, really hurt the nighttime economy. And I'm sorry, I live with sleeping during the day while the rest of the world is working. I know that there's a lot of us that don't work 9 to 5, and probably I feel at the moment downtown Newcastle, for me, is becoming a place that is becoming impossible for the shift worker to live in.
It's fully daytimed.
The parking. I just got a parking spot, permanent parking spot. You have no idea. This is like I've been blessed by God, and I'm an atheist.
Who are the best bands in town that you've seen? The best local bands?
Probably one of my favorites of all time, and if he ever hears this show, he'll just cringe.
Be sure to tag me.
Is Ben and the Delta Lions. I
Ben
just
Lease, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
I just love that band because it was like I moved up here and it was like, you know, you had all this nice mix of country, rock, punk, and soul and everything. So again, no fixed ideal, just letting everything that has ever come into you, through you, and make. And he told all these wonderful Newcastle stories, man. It was like it was this Springsteen-esque poetry coming out of these young guys, and it just begun. This is like my introduction into what Newcastle is supposed to feel like, right? And the new stuff that he's doing is what I've heard is amazing. I gotta
He's
go
doing solo now, isn't he?
Yeah, man. And the couple of songs that I've heard are just like some of the best kind of folk music. But it's again, he's just got his own feel of things, and he's just got such a wonderful voice and unique phrasing, and you know, it's like drummers, man. You can feel that you like the way the guy's heart beats, you know? Guy that I've just gotten to work with over the last couple of days with him not doing his music thing, but is Nick Connors, who's doing some new stuff. Mm-hmm. And he had and again, it's a singer. Awesome, like, baritone, huge voice. You know, he's not this big guy, and all of a sudden this, like, thing comes out of his face, voice. Man. And you're like, whoa! And he had a band a couple years ago mixed at the ballroom a bunch of time called the White Walkers. Yeah. And I really like kind of some of this kind of spacey kind of Wicked Game kind of, right? And I could hear, God, just this whole wide kind of Americana thing, but had its own little weird twist to it. But it was just the gravity of his voice was always really, really amazing. One of my favorite bands that just totally blew my doors off live had to be Trollhagen.
Yeah, they were cool.
Man, like and
Thrashville, I saw him at.
I like when bands are so good that they stop taking themselves seriously, right? Where, you know, what they do is so insane, and it's actually really tricky, some of the stuff that they do, but they're like so good that they can be comedic and really loose in their delivery, where it's just like, you know, it's just awesome. You know, like the first time I saw him, you know, the singer's got like this brown leisure suit on with the suspenders, and he's like, you know, he looks like some character of some guy that would run a pawn shop somewhere in like the Bronx where I was growing up, you know?
There's a quote of the day I heard at Thrashville where I saw him. A friend was there, the singer of a band, Jaden, and he goes, "Man, I've had too much acid for this. It was just too much for him."
First time I heard this guy. That guy at the and did they do the ABBA thing?
Oh, I don't remember myself, man. But it was
they do the give me a troll after midnight. Give me, it's hilarious.
I didn't know what to do with it, man. I enjoyed it. I was like, that's different, and there's some of it was just wicked, but then they metal and circus music sort of mixed together.
I'll get into, you know, some of the stuff that's like more my age, but like, you know, I love the idea. You know, it's still supposed to be entertainment, right? You know, like I love serious music, you know, but it's still supposed to be entertaining, you know, and
they definitely tick that box.
Yeah, you know, and it's just come for the ride. Yeah. You're gonna have fun afterwards, you know. Like Ben Lee, I toured with Ben Lee years ago during the Iraq War when he came out with that "Awake Is the New Sleep," and it was just like for the time that was happening, he had written like this perfect kind of antidote for this really, really tense time in the world. And so I went and did a few weeks of this run where he came out, you know, flowers on the mic stands and stuff, and he'd have his little Zen dinners and stuff and everything. It was all really, really nice, though. Band was really, really good. And then at the end of the night, very last thing he'd do is he'd send the band off, pull the feedback buster out of his acoustic guitar, sit on the drum riser, throw the feedback buster at his monitor guy. Yeah. And he had this song, had this lyric about, whatever it is, you can do it, be it kind of thing. But he turned it into kind of like a tantric mantra. But they turned the entire PA off.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, after this big kind of, production rock show, it's poppy and stuff and all that, but it's still big, it's still loud. Suddenly the lights come down and you have this little kind of waif of a guy and an acoustic guitar, and everybody gets drawn in, and at the end you just say, thanks, good night, and you walk off. No encore. They wouldn't spoil that moment. And I remember it took me by surprise the first time, like, he's still on stage, and I see the front of house guy mute his console.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are you doing? He goes, much. And I was like, and I remember doing it, one of the gigs was at Canberra University, right? Where you do it in the cafeteria thing that they turn into a venue, right?
Yep. I used to go to the Metal for the Brains down there.
Yeah. So like I watched the classic example of a whole bunch of kids that are walking around with the weight of the world on their shoulders, not just what was going on politically and whatnot and weird at the time. They've got mom and dad's weight on their shoulders of uni and their own particular stresses and all that. And I watched a whole bunch of people, including the rough stagehands that we hired to unload the truck, all walk out just a little less bothered. Yep. And they were all turning around talking to each other. This is really cool. Everybody walked in their own little bubbles. And throughout that show, I watched them all get disarmed. And then walk out in little groups all talking about this really nice experience that they had. And I always respected Ben Lee for that record, that he had this kind of really magical timing to come up with something that I felt like as I went through the country doing this thing, going like this little bit of fairy dust I was kind of like going around and dropping in little towns, I
think he gets a rap as being a bit lightweight, Ben Lee, but maybe it is, as you say, it's sort of an antidote to the gravitas of everything else.
I think he came off as a really precocious young kid before that, but I also think he was a kid.
Yeah.
There's a point where he got to grow up, but, aside from that, it's like I've gotten to work with some of my heroes, like you actually asked about, and it's kind of like weird. Like, I've gotten now over the last few years to mix the Black Sorrows a number of times. And this is one of those bands that I was a fan of before I landed here. And I knew JoJo Zepp and the Falcons and all that. And I did a couple of gigs with those guys years ago. And then suddenly the world brought it back around again that we were supposed to cross paths.
Yeah.
And in a weird way, it's just one of those things, just personally, we've all just clicked. Every one of us, everybody in the band, even the guys who replace people when certain people can't play. It's just like, and when they walk in and see me in a venue somewhere, the smiles come and you see the stress in the back relax.
Yeah.
And we have an incredibly wonderful time, and I get to mix one of the musically most amazing live bands that's ever walked.
Yeah.
And Claude,
such a prolific songwriter,
that
too.
Guitar player, man. Every time I see him, I'm like, Mr. New York Groove, because he's born in New York City. He's lived most of his life here. But, like, you do not lose where you come from.
Yeah.
Right? And, he's all, but man, it still comes out just like there's Brooklyn or something in there, and my dad's from Brooklyn, so.
You play music too. Do you think of yourself more as a musician or as a sound man? What's your...
Right now, I'm frustratingly not as much of a musician as I'd like to be. My production work it's just one of those things. It comes and goes. Look, I had a big 15-year break where I felt like I wasn't a drummer anymore.
Yep.
I was playing acoustic guitar. I made a living as a busker for a while in Germany, which is like a whole other thing. But I had this wonderful opportunity, and like drums was my first thing. And I remember when I hit 40, I kind of hit this thing where, and I've been running really, really hard. I moved countries twice, and I kind of was like, I want my first instrument back. I really, I worked with all these great drummers, and every once in a while I'd get to sit down, like check a kick drum or something like that, and I'd just be like, I miss this, and I didn't really realize how much it was actually a really, really integral part of my personality because in that time I realized that the fact that I hadn't played, I had actually kind of shut a little bit a part of me down.
Yeah.
Right? It became part of my DNA, right?
Yeah.
I love playing acoustic guitar. I love singing. But when you get down to it, the thing that is most in my muscle memory is playing drums. So I had a young guy that was working with me on a lot of big shows. He was what we refer to as my cable bitch, but what he is your is your patching wonderkind that as you're doing 20 bands in a day, make sure that there is a microphone everywhere, that there needs to be a microphone. Everything that's plugged in is plugged in where it's supposed to be plugged in, and walks up and tells me what I've got.
Yeah.
So cable bitch is a bit unfair, but it's the way we do it. And he had just gotten an endorsement. He had a band. He had just gotten an endorsement, so I had this kid he was selling off. And I was just like, I'll have that, old Tama.
Yeah.
And so I, threw it in the garage and started, trying to remember things. Things come back straight away. It was like I remembered how to play. I needed to work on the physicality of it a little bit. And then I'm out working on a Bon Scott tribute show. And seriously, it's like 2 months after I've gotten a kid.
Yeah. Jump straight in.
After 15 years of not playing. Right. I'm on this thing, and I get into a bit of a jammy thing with. First, it was Di Pritchard and Mark Gable. And Di and I started kind of riffing together. I was checking the drum monitor because the drummer usually didn't make it to sound check or anything. So I just go and get a mix going. Check that it's all going right. And so, I started playing. It got a little heavy, and Mark Gable from the Choir Boys went and took the guitar off, put it down, went and got a cup of coffee. And all of a sudden, I just see these two eyebrows kind of like over the top of the tom-toms.
Yeah.
Kind of like giving this evil little twerk. And I changed groove, and Di kind of followed me. And he changed groove, and I kind of followed him. And he reached over the amp and turned it up, and we jammed for a little bit. And it was kind of like, oh, wow. That was mad. Now, I knew Di a little bit, and I knew his wife at the time, too. But I still was a little scared of this big motherfucker, right? Who plays in this tough-ass band, Rose Tattoo, And so I was still a little bit in awe of this guy. But I was getting to know him, and he's just one of the most lovely human beings that's ever walked planet Earth. And, I don't know, next week he's like, that was kind of fun. I was like, fuck yeah, that was fun. And he's like, I'm looking for a drummer. I'm like, trying not to fucking shit myself.
I'm a drummer.
And it's like, I can't believe this. And he's like, give us your number, give us your address. I'll drop some stuff off. He leaves CDs in my mailbox and says, your first gig's in 6 weeks. Here's 3 hours of material. No rehearsal.
Yeah. Are you ready?
Played the Prem on the very first gig. The regular bass player couldn't make it, so I didn't even have a bass player that knew what was going on in a three-piece. And I ended up playing with him for about 6 years, did an album, and, man, it was like as soon as he dropped this bomb on me, I just locked myself in the garage. And what I knew of what he did as a solo thing was that it was a very Hendrixy thing, which is a simplified version of what he does, but it was a pretty good poke in the right direction. Yeah. So me and Mitch Mitchell went in and just started hashing and just started going for it. Yeah. And what was cool is that he allowed me to, one, basically pick the new bass player and let me make all of the songs of his my own. Yep. He knew that I wasn't going to step on his toes, but like he rarely ever told me what to play. Yep. We organically as a band
just felt it
made those things, and it was a great time, and via that, got to play some incredible things, support, backed Angry Anderson doing the Angry Anderson show, and Angry and bloody Randall Waller jumped up and played with us, and with Emil. Emil came into the band by that point. Emil Warner, unbelievable gun on organ in this town. Yeah. And so, at Frankie's Pizza, we stuffed 7 people on that postage stamp.
It's a killer venue down there.
I am, and I practically had Randall Waller falling on top of my crash cymbal, It was just insane. And so, like, I've gotten to know, like, all these amazing people via that, like, Mark Tinson, who produced the record, and, he's referred to as the Godfather, and I actually call him that.
I'd like to eventually have a chat. I want to read his book first and then sort of pick his brain a bit.
Tino is one of he's just a spectacular human being, and his love of music. And what makes him really special is he has had such offers, I think, to go off and do things away from his hometown in Newcastle. And I think he made a decision that he wanted to always be a Newcastle boy, and I got to support his band Heroes for our Newcastle album launch, and it was just kind of like, wow, it's just like amazing, and he, and I consider him, a really, really great friend now. It's just like he smiles when he sees me, I smile when I see him, and when we work together, we know we're gonna have a fun day.
That's all you can ask for, really, isn't it?
Like I said, it's about people, right? Yeah. It's so. That is a thing that I keep trying to tell people, that, like, the whole life that I'm in, you're in, anyone who's made a living doing this, you do not choose this life. It chooses you. You don't have a choice in the matter. You try and make changes, and they tend to blow up in your face if you ignore this thing that, I'm sorry, we are fundamentally driven to do certain things, some of us, Yeah.
I found that interesting with the last one I did with Simo, Steve Simmons, and he was saying that at the end of the day, whether he becomes successful or not and can do a career of music, he's got to meet these people, and it's, as you say, it's about those relationships that you build, really, more than anything, and those people that you meet.
Yeah, I love the fact that it's like the hard part about it is I've met so many people, like, I can never keep track of names, but, like, I can remember faces and what you played, and possibly even the venue we gigged at, like, because I have the pathways connected, because I can remember, like, what view of you I had because of where my operating position might have been, kind of thing, and it just, man, it's the whole thing. It's about people, because it's like they're people that I love seeing walk into the room, and it doesn't matter what kind of music they're making. It's just
a good time being with
Parkway Drive is like my favorite example of working a tour that, and I love my heavy stuff. Like, I saw Metallica a week before Ride the Lightning was released, right? And Parkway, like, I get what they do, but musically it just doesn't grab me. But the show. And they run like a well-oiled machine, one of the most... I would tour them for 6 months just for the pleasure of working in the atmosphere, because it's just so on top of it. Just reminded me of Stones tours that I've worked on, and Elton John, and where it's just like, you do things right, and we find the money to do things properly, right? And make it nice for everyone. And I just remember their audience and them, and they show up and they do their thing. And the mosh pit and the throwing of the footy in and the parting of the sea thing, and floating the Oompa Loompa guy in the raft out onto the mosh pit, throwing lollies out into the crowd while they've gone from dark background to sunny background and low fog and palm trees. And it's just like, what the hell just happened? And and I remember doing it at a venue. When we did Newcastle before it was rebuilt, I went up to the dress circle, and the house guy ran to me thinking something was wrong because I come up to the dress circle. I'm like, no, come here, watch this.
How much longer do you think you've got in you physically to keep doing
Oh, man.
lugging gear, and
I turned 50.
it's not exactly a retirement plan
No.
musos and super fans and things.
I do have that landmark coming up on me.
Yeah.
Which doesn't really worry me much. But I think, I've definitely stepped back my loading regime. I have, and what's cool is I work for a particular guy that still thinks that people like me are being paid to actually do the engineering work and not the truck work as much, and whenever possible takes away some of the truck work from us.
Yep.
And it's great. And what ends up happening is we go and do really good work. Yeah. Right?
You get to focus on what it is that you do.
I get a new console. I end up having 2 hours walking around, poking around it to get familiar with it.
Get comfortable.
Not bang, 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 let's go. I definitely have had to make some adjustments, because I have injuries and stuff. I had shoulder injuries from back in 2000 and stuff that have, over time gotten creaky.
Yep.
And I sometimes have to be careful, and every once in a while the neck does a thing, and I can be a bit out of service for a little while. But I try to be careful, and thankfully, I figured out my weight problems when I was younger, and I think that's been a really, really good thing for me.
Yep.
It's limited some of the joint damage, probably that's because I've unloaded a lot of semi-trailers. The Stones was 49 semi-trailers, and 27 of them were substage steel. Me and 150 guys did that.
Yeah. Is it hard to look after yourself mentally and physically doing the work that you do?
I think we're talking about it a little bit more, because one of the things that we all deal with is the how it's become 100% contract nature, the business now. And, you're really at the behest of the payer to be able to maintain a budget. And unfortunately, when, not so much now, but in the past, there were years where I had 250 different employers in a year.
Yeah.
So that was every week having something that I was billing, that it was going through somebody's new system.
Yeah.
And even though, when contracting first came, it was kind of monitored a little bit better, and then it all kind of became part of it. And now it feels a little bit more Wild West sometimes. And so that is a struggle, and has always been a struggle in the business. Yeah. But when I had the Star City gig, there was bennies and stuff like that. There were, organized gigs, but those are all casualized now, and there's hardly a permanent position in any of them. Yeah. And I think that's unfortunate.
Resident Soundman's a dying thing, is it?
And it drizzles down. What's funny is there's actually an increase in it in a certain level, because certain levels couldn't afford to tour. Bands that tour places like the Small Ballroom, the Cambridge, couldn't tour if they had to carry a production. Yeah. So the venues end up making arrangements to have systems installed, so that then they're able to have the bands that fit their caliber at a lower price, and they come with their engineers if you're lucky. Yeah. Right? And so that's an unfortunate function of budgets. And an interesting thing that people don't talk about, what I've watched over 20 years, is the decrease in touring budget is almost exactly proportional to the increase in transport costs. Yeah. Because the only thing that you can't cut is gasoline or diesel. Right? You need your hardware. Where do you have left to cut? People. Yeah. And it trickles down. It just trickles down.
Yeah. Where can people find you currently doing sound? What venues are you?
At the moment, I'm doing the most un-rock and roll thing in the world. And it's really fun. I'm working on this Hogwatts thing at 48 Watt Street. Yeah. So it's the whole place is done up as the Hogwatts School. Yeah. And so it's like a bit of dinner theater. Mm-hmm. And it takes place in both parts of the building, and there's a team of actors running around playing parts, and they run the whole house's scoring game. And yeah. And it's hilarious. And so even some local musos are actually playing actor parts in this thing, right? So a young singer by the name of Byron, I can't remember his surname, He's actually Dumbledore.
Yep.
Which is funny. I didn't know it was him until like day 3 because I hadn't seen him without the whole getup with the beard and everything. It's really funny. So like when we have double show days, we have kids shows, and it's been hilarious to watch the actors playing with the kids and stuff.
Yeah.
And
You'd be getting plenty of older crowd too through.
and at night, and they all come dressed, and they're all cosplaying and stuff. And because they've done it once, I think primarily people are coming dressed as the houses.
Yep.
Right. And, you know, you get some other people that cosplay the other things. And the girl who plays, who's the crazy one? Bellatrix.
Oh, yeah.
Who plays Bellatrix. She's hilarious, man.
Yeah.
And she runs around only appearing to the children and then vanishing, except for her scripted scene.
Yeah.
And so she tries to play Phantom all over the venue and pops up.
Yeah.
And there's one really, really funny bit, and Voldemort does the same thing. And so the 2 of them are running around the background while the other 3 are kind of like playing the headmaster routines and the teacher's routines and doing the scoring. So I've got Snape out there, and he does a class and some other stuff, and it's really funny. It's very camp.
Yeah.
But it's great. It's great entertainment. But my favorite bit that I saw the other day is Bellatrix pops out and just pops out to a table when everybody's seated, grabs a bread roll and disappears. About 3 or 4 minutes later, Voldemort comes out with the last piece of the bread roll, just munching on the last little bit, going, and then it disappears again. And it's like absurd, but it's escapist, and there's, you know, food and everything. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
You know, the kitchen staff, they're on it. They're actually having to serve food to a theater schedule in the run of a show.
Yeah.
And so you know, there's always something interesting in everything you get to do. And then like they've got a ball and we do a band in the back. And
Yeah, I was going to say, so they have bands.
yeah. So that's like the, you know,
part of
I've got a band called Evergreen for the second half of it.
Yeah.
I can't think of the
They got
name.
Harry Potter themed songs, have they? Or are they
No.
just playing what they're doing, or-
Just really top 40. They walk in on the winter waltz music, right, from the soundtrack, and I've got ground fog and everything, and they all come in. Woo! And you know, so you know, they're all being fed like chicken legs and sausages and corn on the cob and all that stuff, and this insane caramel mud cake thing that the chef said, well, on this gig, I'm not their dietitian.
Cool. All right, I think that's it, man.
All right, man.
Covered off a good bit.
Thanks very much.
No
Appreciate
worries,
it.
man. Thanks for being a part of it.
Cheers.
Legend. Cheers.